AI is rapidly shifting how we organize and work. But if we want a human-centered future, we can't just react to technology. We are all agents in shaping change. Let's help technology and talent work better together.
Where do people put attention, and where does attention need to be, and are those the same thing? So you were just talking about this idea that oftentimes the customer is the queen or the king, right? And so they get the most attention, the most support, the most resources. And so when we're trying to solve problems for organizations, customer centricity is paramount, right? We all understand that gets drilled in our trainings, and and as we go into companies and for sales, it's the primary generator of cash through revenue, so we get it, right?
Mhm.
And then see this movement of, well, the employee experience matters just as much as, or it should, as the customer experience, because these employees are actually delivering on that brand promise for customers. But somehow in this whole value proposition, it seems like the employee experience is shortchanged.
Mm.
And the companies that actually win, that we both worked in and consulted to, double down and invest on the employee experience. But still in the market, we're looking at AI, we're looking at all the things that are happening, where investment is going, and it is going to customer experience. So we've been talking about this gap we're seeing and how to solve for this, because people can get it theoretically, but how do we put something into practice that really solves some of the opportunity areas that we have for the employee experience for our cultures? So
Mhm.
thoughts on that?
Uh, I I know that there is research. I don't have a specific one, but I can put it in the notes for those that are listening. But there is several studies that show that there is a direct relationship between employee experience and customer experience. The better the employee experience, the better the customer experience. It flows in that direction. So we already know that. So for companies who are not investing in employee experience, it's just harder for them to get a great customer experience. They're making their own work harder than it needs to be. So employee experience should be. Southwest was marketing this, if you remember way back,
Yeah.
putting employee first. But basically, that just translates directly into the customer experience, and that's necessary. And the other thing that occurs to me is that there's some more recent studies that are showing that by and large, the investments into AI have been focused on automation, taking human work and making it machine work. But there is a bigger opportunity that is less common for the designers and adopters of AI, which is to augment or improve
Mm.
human work so that the humans like their work more, they do the things that they value more, they create more value. And ultimately, we know employee experience leads to a better customer experience. So that's where the investment is not going. And what's strange about that is all of the work for automation of human work has led to about a flat gain in productivity, meaning it's not helping companies or the workers become more productive. So we're not actually improving productivity. We're changing around what we spend money on, but we're not growing how much value we're creating for customers in the end. That's not something that is like intuitive, but it turns out that's what's happening. So if we shift our investment a little bit, focus more on augmenting and enhancing the value that people can create, will increase productivity, improve employee experience, and as a result, get better customer experience, as opposed to, say, try to slap a bot onto a customer relationship and assume that because the bot never gets overworked, that the customers are going to be happier. That's not the answer.
I agree. I agree. And when I was listening to you, I'm thinking about speed, right? And I'm thinking about how to navigate the ecosystem of an organization that we've talked about, right? And I'm thinking about how I find the per diem when I'm traveling. Like, how much money do I have per day to eat and to stay at a hotel? And I spend an hour trying to find it based on my state, or based on where I'm going around the U.S. or around the world. And in that hour, it's just lost productivity. Or getting ready to go out on parental leave, and I'm trying to figure out all the healthcare benefits and things that I need to do to prepare. And I'm also trying to figure out how to transition my work into a knowledge management system. And it's taking me hours to find out what I need to do for myself personally and my family, and then also what I need to do for the organization to make sure there's risk management in place, with knowledge in the right place for the people that are going to pick up my work. And so all this time is being lost from a productivity perspective, but also like my confidence in the organization that they care for me, they're supportive of me. I'm using the example of like the childcare for now.
Mhm.
But two things here: there's productivity for the organization, and there's engagement for the human that's working in this environment. So I just think with these types of enhancements, you can really fulfill the promise of the organization getting what they need from a productivity perspective. You can fulfill the needs of the employee getting what they need for their experience and their engagement. So really, it is a win-win for both parties involved. But again, still such a great opportunity for us to focus and prioritize.
Absolutely. I think it occurs to me, listening to what you're saying, that what we need to do is engage the employee in thinking about what could be improved or changed to allow them to do more of what they want or can to create value. So actually get them involved rather than imposing or coming up with new products and services and rolling them out top down. We should start listening and experimenting with staff about, how can we use this to make your job better, to make your work more efficient, to unlock new value that you've been blocked from creating because of XYZ reason. So I know a lot of people hand wave say, you know, involve the employee in changing the employee experience. But I think when it comes to technology, buying the technology, um, adapting or designing the technology for your organization, rolling it out, they're actually not that involved. Like, how often are your everyday employees involved before the technology is chosen, when you're just doing the exploratory phase of, you know, what can be done with this technology? So that should be extremely normal and tends to be not necessarily an afterthought, but not something that gets probably as much time and attention as it deserves. So
Yeah,
I would
that's
argue get the employee involved before you make any commitments to new AI tech on the
yeah.
customer side or the employee side. Have them help you think about what can be done to improve the experience for both parties, and then start thinking about adopting tech.
I think that's spot on, and I've been a part of a few experiments internally to create like the future of work labs, the innovation labs,
Mm,
the customer centricity labs. These kind of small teams that are focused on these opportunity areas for organizations, and they're themed, right? Like, how do we improve the customer experience? How do we improve the employee experience?
mm,
What is the future of work and what's happening in the market, and how do we bring in a lot of that information? In this context, is AI, and just but getting the employees, as you said, involved in building out what are the opportunity areas. What would make your experience here and your productivity in your work enhanced, and using that data from them to generate what the lab's focus areas are is fantastic, right? Because it's similar to like the employee engagement surveys. We ask a lot of questions, we get a lot of really rich data. Are we going to do something with the data? Some people do that very well, others have opportunities. But these labs, really, the data that feeds the focus for AI and the
mhm.
future of work really should come from the employees, right? Can you speak a little bit about your experience with these labs, and also just employee centric data to feed into the future of work?
Yeah. I have a question for you as well, which is how do you avoid making a lab a report without a result? Um, in terms of our approach to labs, what we've seen is you do discovery, design, hypothesis sort of formation, and testing. You could just call it testing or experimentation, um, which includes prototyping, and then um, trial, launch. And the process is that process that I just described is iterative, meaning you do the whole process once quickly, and then you do it again on a longer scale with a deeper dive. So you might even do the whole process in a week, say, come in, get some quick information from previous studies, talk to employees, do some questionnaires, do some interviews, come up with new ideas, prototype them, test them with a handful of people, get initial feedback, and start to, let's say, put your pet ideas aside, or potentially start to see what notions were completely off and which ones are kind of headed in the right direction, and then go again. A bigger group of employees, a deeper dive, a more rigorous analysis, a bigger ideation involving more people from different backgrounds, a wider variety of ideas to try another test. And then you do these processes with gradual scaling until you reach a point where you have a lot of evidence for a particular direction. And then you start focus on execution and efficiency and optimization against that direction.
That
Um,
makes sense.
yeah,
And those cycles or sprints are relatively fast. I mean, you're opening the aperture for more employees and more data gathering as you go through the next
yeah.
cycle. Typically, those are how long?
You might start, like I said, with 1 week in the initial one, and then 4 weeks in the second one, and then possibly 3 months in the third run. By the end of that 3 months, if you've done the prototyping and experimentation properly, if it's not just PowerPoints, you should have a lot of data already about what people
Yep.
like, don't like, what works, what doesn't work. There are going to be some technical barriers. There are going to be some social or legal barriers. There are going to be some data constraints. So in many cases, it helps to have a foundation of, say, a partnership model. Like, how do we partner with different companies? What are the fast track partnerships? What are the slow partnerships? So we need to have some kind of, and then data sharing and legal compliance, and then some addition technology platform decisions made. Assuming that we have those basic kind of pieces in place, it can go quite fast. But sometimes you run into those barriers and you have to put them up as like, okay, before implementation, we'll have to address this potential big decision. But right now, we're going to try and run an experiment without it.
Yep, that makes sense. And so in my mind, a lot of times companies are struggling with change management, and if you do these cycles and these sprints, I mean, change management's built in because you're capturing the employees views, their feedback, you're iterating, and so when it comes time for the third cycle and you're ready to actually put change or product into the system formally, you've done a lot of that change management, so it's a smoother implementation path. To
Yeah,
answer your question around how do you make sure that this is valuable for the organization, that there's focus, that you're not just kind of brainstorming and coming up with these moonshot ideas that might not actually come down to earth and be grounded. I
yeah,
always do that. You start with intention, right? Like, so what problem are we solving for? What is the outcome that we're driving towards? And so it could be, an efficiency. How do we make it better or faster, right? With whether it's customer calls or data or satisfaction. So there's always data driven, number one, right? And
mm,
outcome focused. And
yeah,
so you can do the effectiveness or the efficiency metrics, but like as we're thinking about the future and a lab, like we want to solve for improving customer satisfaction or customer retention by X amount, right? And then that really focuses the group on, well, how could AI help us with that? Or how could we do process improvement? And we've talked about also like the amount of data that's in an internal organization for use by the employees, and how you can have safety manuals, standard operating procedures, you can have onboarding information, first time manager training, compliance. There's all this information, right? I
yeah,
remember when I did an audit once at HSBC, and we found like 6,472 objects, right? And back then it was like, let's consolidate that down to like 500 globally, right, for 300,000 plus employees. And
yeah,
now the game's changed where yes, you can and should consolidate, but the type of support that Disco, which is the AI bot, can provide is like you can find anything in your ecosystem of knowledge management lightning fast, right? So can you just remind people like how that works and why we see an opportunity here again? With we started with like everyone's focused on the customer. If we reframe and say the employee is the customer, how do we optimize their experience? Can you just talk a little bit about how Disco helps and can really help with the experience for the employees that then drive the customer experience?
yeah. Um, there's three, I think, just as a grounding, it's important to step back. So we like to look at first principles, or to kind of step back and look at the big picture of the organization first before jumping into specific solutions. So, like in this case, we're talking about employee experience, getting access to information to make decisions, take action quickly. Where does that information live? I think the obvious place would usually be, oh, we have an ERP. We have, if it's on the recruiting side, an ATS. We have different tools available, and that's where most of our information is. I would say a lot of the numerical information lives in there. So tracking behaviors, patterns, activities, and that's good. You can also get some hidden information like timestamps and things that it's also numerical. That doesn't necessarily live in those machines, but can be gathered by them. The second level of information is um, deliberately created material. So these are like brochures about your product. We once worked with an insurance company that had 4,500 variants of one type of product. So that's a lot of brochures. No salesperson is going to memorize that.
Right.
Has to do with different regions, different, issues along those lines. But like that's, you have your top company in the world, Apple, with like 6, 7 different products, and then you have this company which is medium-sized company with 4,500 variants of one product. So, big difference. So documents that have been deliberately created, policies, product guides, standard operating procedures, these don't tend to live inside your ERP. They can be created by anyone. Anyone with a word processor or a spreadsheet can make a document that then gets sent around and is used by a small team and potentially can be scaled up to a larger team. These documents are extremely hard to deal with. That's what Disco is focused on initially. There's one more level of information that we are not touching yet, but this is, I'll just call it social information. So you and I having a conversation, um, you know, emails, phone calls. So there's also a lot of information contained there that's not necessarily documented, or maybe it's just exists at the level of notes. And there's AI trying to work on transcription and processing Slack messages and things like that. That could also come in. So we're focused on the middle layer, which is everything outside of your ERP, any type of document that anyone has created that people should know and should be able to use to make a choice, but may not read ahead of time. There's no way you're going to read those 4,500 variants of the product until you know which customer it's relevant for. But then you won't necessarily know how to find what you're looking for because there's too much information and it's too specific. So what AI can do is to create context. That's what this machine is really good at. So it's taking the context of a particular situation. We have this type of situation, these type of inputs, and you can just say, okay, I'm traveling to this country at this time, and I have this type of client. What can I expense and when?
Yep.
So that may not be a document that exists now, but the AI can create a document for that situation. So it custom builds an answer to that question across multiple policies and says, here's your plan. That plan may not actually exist as a physical document, but can be created across documents. And that can be for any type of question where legal, procurement, finance, HR, operations information has been recorded.
Yep.
Yeah,
I love that.
so that's what we're
And
focused on.
we were talking with a prospective customer recently that was talking about manufacturing and safety and like getting into controlled environments where
Mm,
there's chemicals and there's all kinds of other substances and it's kind of dangerous, right? And it can be, and so the margin for error needs to be razor thin, but we know that can expand or contract. And so wouldn't it be great right before you go in to this controlled environment or lab, for you to be able to be on your smartphone and type in entering lab, what are the key safety precautions or steps that I need to take, and it's right there
yeah,
versus like having to look at
exactly.
it training for an hour and a half, right? Like it's super fast and targeted to what you need when you need it.
Yeah. Unlike the expense case, which maybe has a downside of some inconvenience, this one has a potential risk factor. So people's safety or capital expenditure costs and risks that we don't want to take on. And then compliance risks as well. So I think in any industry where there is a risk of nuanced or specific outlier cases disrupting critical operations, having the ability to check and check again, manufacture checklists or plans or specific considerations for that situation is extremely helpful. So yeah, Disco and AI in general is quite good for that.
Absolutely. So, in summary, we've been talking about the speed of change and the market's flooded with new tools. Our focus with Brave is really internally for improving the employee experience, which will have downstream effects on customer and all of the metrics that everyone tracks. And
Hmm.
we've also talked about how Brave and Disco specifically is super fast to get up and running. And so while everyone's looking around trying to figure out what's happening with AI, and a lot of the big ERPs and other tools are starting to put bots in place, we think there's a market here for all the existing knowledge management information that is complementary, but sometimes outside of the systems, or even like the PDFs are in, say, like, your HRIS system. And
Yeah.
so we're just urging people to consider getting into the game now in an area that matters significantly to your business and to your people. And so, any final thoughts on that?
It's time to act. There's no reason to wait. It's important to think about how to improve. If you're going to be cautious, the thing to be cautious about is what is the best way to improve our employee experience and how to take advantage of this. You do not want to be cautious about whether to act at all. You have to act because the companies that adopt AI are the companies that win, and the companies that pass on AI are the companies that lose jobs. We're going to talk more about that in another conversation, but that is a fact that is super critical. So there's pretty much no choice. We have to figure out how to adapt and adopt this new technology. And where we want to take our time is thinking about what's the most valuable thing that we can do in our organization. And the best way to find out what's more valuable is to actually experiment, to use, to your point, to use data. So rather than say, have a lot of conversations about what's the most valuable, what we should do is come up with ideas and test what can be valuable and see how valuable they really are. So the key is acting and learning from your action as opposed to waiting and talking.
I agree. And
Yeah.
speaking of acting and learning, we have decided that we're going to offer some opportunities for people to take action, sign up, and engage with us and learn about how to make sense of what's currently going on, both in the market and their organizations, through an opportunity to chat with us. Either the two of us and an individual, just kind of office hours, 30 minutes. Like, let's talk about what's going on and what questions do you have about how AI can help and how Brave might be able to help, but also bringing leaders from shared services together just to start to have conversations about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're thinking, how you're feeling. So stay tuned, folks, because we're going to be having these spaces come up for us to be able to chat and engage, and we look forward to that learning opportunity with all y'all.